Russia's invasion of Ukraine is pushing Finland and Sweden toward NATO. In response, Russia threatens to use nuclear weapons. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Matt Gnezda, filling in for Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Incogni. You probably know that companies are collecting your personal data, but you may not realize just how many. Dozens, maybe hundreds, most of which you've never even heard of. And you have no idea what they're doing with it. Incogni helps you stop them. I'll explain more at the end. So, Russian leader Vladimir Putin is making NATO great again. Not only has he made governments around the world unite against him, he's also driven Sweden and Finland closer to NATO. It's kind of like when women wind up in relationships with mediocre guys because the dude that was pursuing them before was way, way worse. This could be a win for Sweden and Finland, but it could be an even bigger win for NATO, which I'll talk about later. But first, how serious are these European countries about joining the military alliance? And why is this significant? Both Sweden and Finland are partners with NATO, but not full members. That means they share intelligence and do military exercises with NATO, but don't, for example, have to come to a NATO country's defense if it's attacked. It's kind of like an extended free trial. Not the type of trial that NATO wants to give Putin, though. Until February, it seemed like this would remain the status quo. Both Sweden and Finland have avoided joining NATO because they were afraid of Russia's response. They even kept their non-aligned status after Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 and Crimea in 2014. And as recently as January this year, Finland's prime minister said it was very unlikely her country would join NATO while she was in office. Typical millennial, afraid of commitment. But all that changed with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Suddenly, both Finland and Sweden saw how isolated they would be if Russia were to attack them.
The security landscape has completely changed, both with the demands from Russia in December and then the invasion of Ukraine. And given that situation, we have to really think through what is best for Sweden.
Everything changed when Russia invaded Ukraine. I think people's mindset in Finland, also in Sweden, changed and shifted very dramatically because of Russia's actions.
Polls in both countries back that up. According to Finnish MTV News, only 30% of Finns favored joining NATO back in January, but by March, 68% were in favor of joining NATO. In Sweden, there's been a similar trend, although not quite as dramatic. But a recent poll showed a slim majority of Swedes are now also in favor of joining NATO. Both countries have said they'd make a decision either way by the end of May. There's a big NATO meeting coming up in June where NATO will agree on a new strategy for the next decade. Is it just me, or does this sound like the end of a rom-com where the female lead agrees to marry another guy to spite her ex, and then the male lead has to go break it up? It's not too late to realize the error of your ways, apologize, and win them back, Vladimir. If Sweden and Finland do decide to join NATO, the 30-member alliance would become 32 members, and it would put another of Russia's neighbors inside the bloc. This is one of the reasons Putin said he invaded Ukraine, to prevent NATO from expanding to its doorstep. In response, Putin made the most Putin move ever. He threatened to deploy his nukes. His love nukes. I'll have more on that after the break. Welcome back. Putin's invasion of Ukraine has been a wake-up call for Finland and Sweden. Neither are members of NATO, meaning they'd be in the same position as Ukraine if Russia were to attack.
The Russian action, the brutal war in Ukraine, that is a wake-up call to us all.
If they join NATO, this would be bad news for Russia. This is NATO's border with Russia now. If Finland and Sweden join, NATO's border with Russia would double in length. Ironically, Putin claims he started the war in Ukraine to keep NATO from expanding, and now his war is potentially going to make NATO even bigger. In typical Putin fashion, Russia is now threatening to deploy nuclear weapons near Finland and Sweden if either country joins NATO. To be clear, Russia isn't saying they would nuke Finland and Sweden, just that they would put nukes near Finland and Sweden, which is a totally logical move. How else can Russia convince Sweden and Finland that they don't need to join NATO to protect them from a violent, unhinged madman than by threatening to do something violent and unhinged? Russian national security official and former president Dmitry Medvedev said Russia would also strengthen its land forces and air defense and deploy significant naval forces in the waters of the Gulf of Finland in this scenario. Given that Medvedev is a senior member of the Security Council of Russia, it's pretty safe to bet that what he says reflects what Putin is thinking. And it's safe to bet that Putin is always thinking about nukes. Ukraine is putting up more of a fight than expected? Nukes! Finland and Sweden are thinking of joining NATO? Nukes! Taco Bell discontinued the Mexican pizza? Nukes! That's the real reason they brought it back. This comes after Putin ordered Russia's nuclear forces to be put on high alert because of the war in Ukraine. And Medvedev declared Russia had the right to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, even if Ukraine didn't use them first. But deploying nukes to Europe might be an empty threat. You see, Russia has threatened to deploy them to Kaliningrad, which is between NATO members Poland and Lithuania. Lithuania's defense minister says Russia has definitely had nuclear weapons there since before the war in Ukraine. Like I said, Putin always has nukes on the brain. But there are conflicting reports about whether Russia actually has any nuclear weapons there. So you're saying Putin is just talking a big game but might not be able to back it up? No. Does this look like the type of guy who's trying to overcompensate for something? Now, for a country to join NATO, all 30 members have to approve it in their home country. Applicants also have to meet certain criteria, like proving they adhere to democratic principles and that they would actually be an asset to NATO. Sweden and Finland already meet NATO's criteria, so that's not a problem. But NATO has no control over how long it takes for each member to ratify it in their home country. And after this final commercial break, why Finland and Sweden joining NATO would be a huge boost to NATO. Welcome back. Putin's actions in Ukraine have scared Finland and Sweden into possibly joining NATO. Typical millennial, always having to deal with existential dread placed on us by some boomer. This is a problem for Putin because he doesn't want NATO to get bigger, and he especially doesn't want these two countries joining NATO. Finland is right on Russia's border, and it has 280,000 active troops and 900,000 reservists. For being known as the happiest country in the world, Finland is shockingly well armed. That's compared to less than 5,000 troops that NATO had in Baltic states before the war in Ukraine. Sweden's military force is much smaller with less than 20,000 active troops. But together with Finland, they could bring a lot to the table by supplying advanced fighter jets. Reminder, Russia is having a hard time dealing with Ukraine. Now they want to take on Sweden, Finland, and NATO. This is like losing a basketball game at your local YMCA and thinking, yup, I'm ready to try out for the NBA. Sweden also holds territory that can play a vital role for NATO, the Swedish island of Gotland. It's right in the middle of the Baltic Sea, and NATO could use it to defend Baltic states like Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and Estonia. Ben Hodges, the former commanding general of the US Army in Europe, said there is no island anywhere that is more important than Gotland. Finland and Sweden's geographic location could also help NATO deter Russian aggression across the Arctic and Nordic regions. Both Finland and Sweden have experience supporting NATO missions in the Balkans and Afghanistan, participating in military exercises and sharing intelligence. NATO officials have said that Finland is even more capable of conducting joint operations than some NATO members. It sounds like NATO should be the ones joining Sweden and Finland. Those happy Scandinavians are not to be trifled with. This is like finding out that an adorable bunny rabbit could mess you up in a fight. By becoming NATO members, Finland and Sweden would be able to exchange even more intelligence with NATO than they already do. All this combined means we could be seeing some of the most significant changes to NATO in its 73-year history. In the words of former Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb, Putin has only himself to thank. That would be like Putin shooting himself twice in the foot, and getting that treated at a hospital would be extra painful, since every hospital logo would remind him of the Swedish and Finnish flags. And this episode has been sponsored by Incogni. I'm a big fan of Incogni, and here's why. Companies are collecting your personal information all the time, whenever you do anything online. And they're not just tracking your general browsing data. They're collecting personal things like your name, your home address, your social security number, your entire employment history. Things you definitely wouldn't tell someone on a first date. And then, like a crazy ex-girlfriend who knows all your secrets, they're buying it, selling it, and trading it. And now, all your information is out there. If companies just use it to sell you stuff, you're lucky. The bigger danger is when there's a data leak. Like that time in 2015 when Costco got hacked and customers' private information was exposed. Obviously, it's embarrassing that hackers could find out that Costco is where I buy underpants. But worse than that, the hackers stole users' emails, passwords, and potential credit card information. And if Costco can be hacked, so can all the smaller companies that buy and sell your data. So I signed up for Incogni back in February. I was shocked to find out that dozens of data brokers had my private information. I'd never heard of most of these companies. So what Incogni does is it actually forces these companies to delete your data. There are already laws that allow you to do this yourself, but the laws are complicated and they're different for each region. But Incogni just handles this for you. So just 8 weeks after signing up, Incogni had already gotten my private information removed from 16 of these data brokers. And I didn't even have to do anything after signing up. So you should do it too. Check out Incogni using the link below or go to incogni.com/uncovered. The first 100 people to use the code UNCOVERED will get 20% off. So check out Incogni. Once again, I'm Matt Gnezda. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.